I think sometimes it's important to remember for anybody, especially when it comes to business, just because you can do something doesn't always necessarily mean that you should. And when I look back at WrestleMania 2, that's kind of my lasting impression of that event. Just because you could do it, Vince McMahon, doesn't mean that you should have. Now, when it comes to WrestleMania 2, I know a couple years ago I did the first go around of the review series with Triple T on the old Off the Rope Show channel. I gave this show, I think, a very, very generous grade of like a B minus or a C plus. That's not the case at all with this show. Now, a couple more years, I can go back and watch it again, and I'm like, oof, eesh, not one of the better manias. Like I said, I get what the WWE was trying to accomplish here, and I understand the philosophy. And as I've talked about before, I think Vince's genius, I talked about this in the WrestleMania 1 review, his genius comes from not so much his own unique ideas of making them work, but taking what somebody else has done, putting his own spin on it, making it his own, and making it better and running out there and doing it. And WrestleMania 2, make no mistake about it, just like WrestleMania, the whole concept was a blatant ripoff of Starcade dressed up in a different way. WrestleMania 2 was a ripoff of Starcade 85 in a lot of ways, where Dusty was running two venues at the same time. Vince said, he can run two. Damn it, I'm a McMahon. I'll run three. And that's exactly what he did. He wanted to establish his superiority. If they could do two, he could do three, and he felt he could do those three better. And not only was he just going to do three venues, he wanted to do it with a strategic purpose in mind, be in three different time zones in the three largest media markets in the country. New York the first hour, Chicago the second hour, and LA the third hour. And if you're in Vince's shoes after the success of WrestleMania 1 and how well your company's doing at that time, you can risk this. You can try and be overly ambitious. It's better to try and fail than fail to try. So, like I said, I get that. And if it's something that would have worked, in every way, shape, or form, it could have been one of those transcendent events that just really established WWE's entertainment dominance. But I think even now in 2014, there are technological challenges for doing this. I know they talked about this on the True Story of WrestleMania DVD. Dick Ebersol talked about this, the fact that in 1986, this was something that was just viewed as impossible and probably shouldn't have been done because they just weren't ready for it. And all throughout the show, you had the lapses and awkward looks and awkward stares and it just wasn't a very smooth production. And that does hurt. To me, when you're doing your granddaddy of them all, your Super Bowl, your production needs to be on point. You can't have mistakes. You can't have lapses. You can't have these awkward silences and awkward pauses and awkward transitions and all of these different things. And WrestleMania 2 was full of them. Now, in terms of the structure of the card, they were giving you basically a big main event for the New York show in Uniondale at the Nassau Coliseum. They were going to give you a big main event for Chicago there at the Rosemont Horizon. And then at the LA Sports Arena, they were going to give you the big main event, the ultimate main event with Hogan and Bundy in the cage for the WWF Championship. Now, one thing I've always found interesting about this Mania was that it was held on a Monday. And I still always wonder why this event was held on a Monday. It was something I would always like to ask Vince McMahon. Why would you not conduct this on a Saturday or a Sunday? But hey, between the three venues, he drew over a little over 40,000 people. That's an average of 13,500 per venue. That's a pretty damn good attendance running three different cities at the same time, which to me is tremendously challenging and all of this. But when you look at the show, the first hour of it, you get Orndorff, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, that is, in the Magnificent Morocco. That was a fun match for me, even though it didn't go very long. Another fun match to me was Randy Savage versus Georgie Animal Steel for the Intercontinental Championship. Again, a fun match, even though it wasn't very long. You had the real introduction, kind of Jake the Snake Roberts on the big stage. You wrestled, of all people, George Wells. Sure. This first hour of the show is actually a lot of fun to me. Now, you get to that main event of that first hour there at Nassau with Mr. T and Roddy Piper in that boxing match. This was a perfect match to kind of close out and main event that first hour. It's fun to go back and watch it and, frankly, make fun of it. Piper did everything he could to make this work, and I give him a lot of credit for that. because T obviously wasn't in the same shape that he was for WrestleMania 1. This is an entirely different animal. You got T throwing phantom punches, and Piper has to pretend like it knocked his world or knocked his socks off, and Piper did everything he could to try and make this work, and I give him a lot of credit for that. So like I said, the first hour to me, if nothing else, is a lot of fun. Now, in terms of the second hour, this is when they shifted to Chicago. This second hour was really built around that 20-man battle royal, which featured WWF kind of versus the NFL. And you're bringing in people like Harvey Martin. You've got Dick Butkus as a special enforcer, and you've got Bill Fralick, and who else am I forgetting? Well, I'm not forgetting William Refrigerator Perry, but he was in it. You know, this was kind of one of these things. It's NFL versus WWF. See these 20 fucking Russ Francis were there and all these other people. And it's like, you know, these 20 big motherfuckers pretty much are going to fight it out, and let's see who wins. And, you know, this is always memorable to me, the interaction between the Refrigerator and Big John Studd. And this was the perfect type of big event to have there in the Chicago portion of the show, with the Chicago Bears having just won a couple months earlier Super Bowl 20 and destroying the New England Patriots. You know, Refrigerator Perry was as much the 80s as Mr. T was. He was hot. He was white hot in terms of being a corporate spokesperson. So to have somebody like a Mr. T, or excuse me, a William Refrigerator Perry, having the fridge involved in a part of your WrestleMania 2 show was a stroke of genius, because he was so over with the masses. He was beyond question going to bring, again, mainstream, fresh, new eyeballs to your product. And here, this was a good showcase, I think, for Bret Hart. He lasted until the final two, and Andre the Giant ultimately won, so everybody was happy. In the tag team match, the tag title match here, that was the so-called main event of the Chicago portion of the show, the British Bulldogs versus the Dream Team. It's actually a really good tag match. Really good tag match. No complaints about it. I was a huge British Bulldogs fan as a kid. Still am. Still am. And I love Matilda. I heart Matilda. I don't care. But it's kind of interesting to me how Vince was basically sitting there and selling everybody in the New York audience and in the Chicago audience that basically, and in the LA audience, frankly, too, that you're going to pay for this event, but you're only really going to get an hour of show live and in person. And we're going to drop these big screens down, and you're going to watch the other 2 hours on these screens. It's a very hard sell, but he did it. You know, and this was the first WWF WrestleMania show, because WrestleMania 1 was strictly closed circuit. This actually did some pay-per-view too. So this was the WWF again venturing out into a new world and taking on all types of different challenges. But ultimately, the show was built around the last hour, the LA hour. And you could talk about the other matches like Steamboat and Hercules Hernandez. You talk about Adrian Adonis. You could talk about the Funks. That's Terry and Haas Funk, by the way, against JYD, and I think it was Tito Santana. But ultimately, it all culminates within the old blue steel cage. The old blue steel cage. I miss that steel cage. I wish they used that steel cage today instead of the pussy fence steel cage. You got King Kong Bundy with Bobby the Brain Heenan taking on Hulk Hogan for the WWF Championship. And this actually was a solid cage match. And there's one thing you could count on if you were Vince McMahon during this time frame in the WWF, is that when it all came to pass and you got to where the chips were on the table and everything was on the line, you knew Hulk Hogan ultimately would deliver the goods and send the people home happy and wanting to come back for more. And this is one of these things to me. You call me a Hogan Mark, you call me whatever you want. But if I've got one wrestling match with my company on the line and I want to make sure that I get the designated desired result that I'm seeking, I'm putting Hulk Hogan in that main event. You give me some other dance partner, and I feel like I'll be safe. Because Hogan always had that ability. But this was a good cage match here. You know, the whole story of how King Kong Bundy came to feud with Hogan. You know, the old Saturday Night main event where Morocco was holding up Hogan's arms and Bundy splashes his ribs and all of this. I live for going back and watching this shit. Some of the things I didn't care for about this show, primarily Susan St. James. I get the point that she was married to Dick Ebersol, and Ebersol was involved with the backstage stuff for this WrestleMania, but it didn't mean we needed to see his wife doing commentary with Vince. That we did not need. We could have used more of Elvira and her peekaboo dress. Now that we could have used more of. Again, The younger generation might not know anything about Elvira, but again, somebody that was very huge in the 80s. The 80s were a lot of fun. A lot of fun. But this show here, like I said, this was an ambitious attempt for Vince and the WWF to clearly try to one-up Dusty and Jim Crockett Promotions. You know, they had taken Starrcade and made it WrestleMania. Now they took Starrcade in 2 venues and tried to make it WrestleMania in 3 venues. I get the whole point again. New York, Chicago, LA, you're trying to really establish your entertainment dominance by being in the 3 biggest media markets in the country. But the show just really doesn't hold up all that well. And, you know, it wasn't, you had some celebrities involved, obviously. You know, you had Ray Charles singing to kick off the show. You had Ozzy Osbourne there with the British Bulldogs. So there was celebrity involvement throughout the NFL Battle Royal, all this other stuff. But the show just doesn't hold up that well with all the lags and lapses due to the production of doing it in 3 different venues. It's just not one of those shows that I ever really care to go back and watch, frankly, except for when I do these WrestleMania review series. That's pretty much it. If you had to give this show a grade, it would be a C minus, maybe a D plus, and that's about it. Definitely not one of the better WrestleMania shows of all time, and maybe in that top 10 or top 5 of worst WrestleManias of all time. I get what he was trying to accomplish, and maybe he did accomplish it to a certain degree. You know, so I give him credit there. But this show in no way measures up to the next one in 1987. That's for damn sure.